Hey everybody, Professor Reed here. Wanted to make this video to give you some a little bit of an overview, also some theory on trying to do a little bit of research. Now, I make a lot of videos that uh, go across the different classes I teach at different schools. Um, so I'm an adjunct at different schools and teach a fair amount of writing classes. So if you're in 101 or one of my other classes or 202 at Penn State, these should apply to whatever you're writing about. And I teach a few of these on literature as well. I think that applies to essays you're going to write on poetry or different types of literature as well. So the bulk of the classes I teach are on conspiracy theories, but what I'm saying is this idea can apply to a lot of different subject matters. Now, what I'm going to do is sort of recommend some strategies for approaching the research process. And one of the things I do want to note, I'm gonna lift a couple different schools, and a lot of the databases you have at those schools are pretty amazing. I teach at Penn State Abington, one of my schools I teach at, and the Penn State database is one of the more robust databases in the country. So by no means should you limit your searches to something like Google Scholar. Definitely employ the library, and also librarians. Most of the schools in the area have also a librarian that is on a chat desk. They're basically sitting at a desk with chat on it, so you can ask them questions as well. So really, the research process, especially for you know um, some of the entry level writing courses, are you want to be smart about writing the papers. Okay, so I'm going to look at specifically a big subject matter in my classes that are on conspiracy theories, the John F. Kennedy assassination. Now, if you're familiar with John F. Kennedy assassination, you're writing about it. It's a classic. It's one of those conspiracies that no matter how long ago the assassination was, 1963, so we're really approaching sort of an anniversary for it, a big one. It's still going to be one that I get a lot of papers on. Now, in terms of the conspiracy theory papers, a lot of times students will have a tendency to write about conspiracies that they sort of have an interest before the class in, and they develop those into papers. JF Kennedy assassination is a great one. So, out of the multitude of different papers that you could write about, JFK assassinations, a great one. So now, if you're just getting your bearings on John F. Kennedy assassination, I would recommend starting out with Wikipedia. Okay, so Wikipedia is, if you walk the hallowed halls of academia, you're going to hear a lot of people sort of bash Wikipedia. Now, we can sort of understand that. Some people would say Wikipedia maybe has a bias to it. So there are sort of conspiracies about Wikipedia as well, but not really talking about that. We're talking more about the information a couple years ago when Wikipedia sort of first came about. There was a fair amount of moments where individuals went on to Wikipedia website and made alterations. So it has this open platform to it. Now, over the course of X amount of years, Wikipedia has made a ton of changes trying to rein in that amount of freedom for some of its editors, and they'll also try to be even though they may have an entry that has this open platform, they will make reference to citations that are needed or other information or dubious site material. Okay, so the challenge, especially of a paper that is looking at conspiracy theories, are we're looking at sort of the concept of what counts as a good source, and we're sort of like dealing with that in the whole process of the class. Okay, so John F. Kennedy assassination, if I was going to start about that, I would definitely start on Wikipedia to get my bearings with the conspiracy theories, because if you spend a little time with it, you're going to see that the CIA, as it mentions here, Mafia, LBJ, Castro, KGB, even some of the individuals are down in Dallas, the Dallas Police Force. All these groups get sort of lumped into sort of like the conspiracy side of who was sort of plotting or working with Oswald, sort of trying to basically say that the lone gunman theory isn't the case. Okay, so I would start off with Wikipedia. Now, okay, good. So this is a term that probably is going to be something. I'm making this video in 2021. So the word frenemy, I think, was pretty big. Maybe in the 2014 time period. Actually, a pretty good year across the board in many ways. But frenemy was going to be one of those words that we would use to describe a person that is your friend, but also sort of working against you on some levels. Okay, so maybe it's a time to like sort of bring that word back in terms of the public speak. If you're familiar with some of the slang of that time period, I want to say like frenemy and saying something was on fleek was sort of like the same time period in terms of like sort of internet trends with certain types of phrases people were using. So if you said you had a frenemy that was on fleek, I mean, you're in a pretty 2014 sort of space. Okay, now the thing about it, not to go too much onto that little rant about internet slang or how that develops, but the idea of frenemy is sort of the way you should think about really a lot of things in life, but also like Wikipedia as a whole, because Wikipedia, as we said in the hallowed halls of academia, it's going to be one of those sources that you can't use in a paper, which is actually a pretty complicated relationship in terms of a conspiracy theory paper. You could actually analyze Wikipedia. So I would say what you don't want to do is use it as a source to verify information. But you can use it as a source that you sort of critique, if that makes sense. But Wikipedia would definitely be where I would start off for not only the concept of conspiracy theory as a whole, but as I get into the specific conspiracy. Okay, so if you're a fan of a JFK assassination, and we're using this one sort of as a model, um, the Wikipedia source actually has a ton of these sort of sub conspiracies around JFK assassination, and some of these are going to be um, a little bit easier to write about, a little bit more, documentation on the internet as well. I know organized crime and sort of a Russian collusion with his assassination are some that I've seen before. Um, Wound alteration. The decoy hearse I've actually never seen in a paper. Um, and then the Federal Reserve conspiracy, also military industrial complex, which is a pretty interesting one. Sort of traces back to Eisenhower saying that in his final speech. So all these are going to be some that end up being sort of sub conspiracies in the JFK assassination. So if you're writing a paper that's a straightforward argumentative research paper, I would definitely utilize some of these conspiracies as part of that breakdown. If I was looking at the cause and effect paper and sort of breaking that down and looking at causes and effect, I could also apply it to that as well. So the idea of Wikipedia is it should be a place you go to sort of get your bearings with it, and also to get some search terms, and to also find out just some more general information about the subject matter. So as you go into the paper, you don't want to use Wikipedia for a verified source in the paper. That being said, I don't know the exact percentage of information that's true on Wikipedia, but it's pretty high, right? So like especially in the conspiratorial world, I have looked at a couple of these on Wikipedia. In fact, if I hear a conspiracy that I haven't heard about, like a student writes about that, I will end up looking up on Wikipedia. And usually it does a pretty good job of summarizing the conspiracy, and it will give me search terms and ideas to look for. Okay, so use Wikipedia in this sort of smart way. Okay, and have it get your bearings and sort of give you sort of a summary of that specific conspiracy theory. Okay, and now, not to say that I'm some sort of expert in JFK assassination. I sort of like the idea of being an expert sort of on nothing, but as many papers as I've seen on JFK, I have actually never heard of the decoy hearse theory until I did a little bit of research on it as well. So that is like sort of shows how sort of robust Wikipedia can be. Okay. All right, good. Now, this is at the bottom of the paper, and like I've said before in class, maybe you heard me say this. I have had students that have said, "Oh, you know what? Like after we spend the time together in the semester, I'll have students that maybe I see in like the cafeteria, right, at Penn State, some layers, so I'll see them out and about, and we'll start to talk, and I'll go, hey, that was a great paper you read. I really enjoyed that. And I'll go, Professor Reed, to be honest with you, I got my sources from the bottom of Wikipedia. And what do you think I say to that? I actually go, great job. That's pretty smart. Because also another thing about Wikipedia is um, the sources are going to be organized in a way that gives it direction. It's going to basically reference the paper. So, if you can find the more specific Wikipedia page you can find, the more specific the source material is going to be. Okay, so um, I know that there's a conspiracy theory on the Sandy Hook murder, the murder that happened with Adam Lanza in Newtown, Connecticut, and a horrific event that happened. The thing is that it actually has a pretty interesting, robust Wikipedia page, and if you get a specific conspiracy theory like that, you can find sources at the bottom that are going to count as source material that's going to help you develop the paper and get a little bit more specific. Now, with my papers on conspiracy theories, like we how can I explain this? Like it's sort of a struggle to get that academic sources versus non-academic sources. If this makes sense, a lot of your academic sources are going to come out of sort of like this analysis of why people believe in conspiracies, whereas your specific conspiracy theories are probably going to come from a more popular based source or a little bit wackier type of source out there, depending on your definition of that, right? But look at the bottom of the Wikipedia page to get some source material that you can go and you can use in the paper. So we want to be, like I said in the beginning, pretty smart about this. The smarter we can be, the more efficient we can work, the more success we're going to have with the paper. So get some searches from Wikipedia, look at those, and then also try to get some more specific types of uh, papers at the bottom of Wikipedia and try to poke around with those. Now you can see here for JFK assassination, there is a ton of different documents on the internet as well. Okay. Now, what I did was, I kept this like so I can walk you through like my sort of research process for this. And this is one I've seen students do before. Starts up JFK assassination. I want to look in the conspiracy side of it. Took a look at Wikipedia. Got some sources down there at the bottom of Wikipedia. I feel like I can use them. Now I want to turn to a website called Google Scholar. If you're not familiar with Google Scholar, it's going to be a website that is ran by Google that basically has the majority of the sources are going to be considered like academic type of scholarly sources. Okay, so it's sort of nice because it's already been vetted for you, and we'll talk about some other features that it has that also make it pretty nice. Okay, and so what I did was I put in JFK assassination, JFK conspiracy, and CIA, and I got 5,000 different results. Now, I probably should have put JFK conspiracy and CIA in quotes, or maybe with a plus sign there to make that specific. The search back a little bit more specific, but it sort of gives you a pretty good feel of like the search results you're going to get. So once again, I've gone from a pretty big subject matter, looked at Wikipedia, got some source materials on there I can use. Now I'm trying to fine tune it and get a couple of more sources that I can use. For one of my classes, Holy Family and also at Penn State, you have to annotate 5 sources. So I look at this, I've basically got all my sources done for the annotation that I found here on the internet. Now, also another thing you can think about with this evolution of source material, some of your sources that you could do for annotation, you can also look up some YouTube videos. You can look up other types of podcasts. What's really great about, over the course of the last 10 years of teaching in academics, you're seeing this real evolution with source material that's occurring there as well. And like, once again, just sort of like hype up the paper a little bit, this is a pretty good paper because it looks at the idea of what counts as sources across the board. Google Scholar is going to be an example of scholarly sources that is owned by Google. And you can see here to the right, it has PDFs and different links. Now, that being said, I'm at multiple schools. So if you're logged on to like I Teach a Holy Family or Penn State website, if you're logged onto that, Google Scholar will take you into um, the whatever sources that Penn State has access to. So Penn State pays a ton of money for source material, and the next step of this would also be engaging some of those different types of search engines. But I'm keeping this one sort of general, looking at Google Scholar, looking at Wikipedia as a potential frenemy. And what we're trying to do here is look at the way you can use Google Scholar as this more general type of source finder. Okay, so like just like Google, sort of the way you go down the rabbit hole on Google, you can start off with whatever and end up at the some places on the internet that you didn't really mean to start off with. The same sort of thing will happen on Google Scholar. It's pretty wide um, source material. And some of these conspiracies this semester, we have some really cool conspiracies that come out of sort of a pop culture internet world. We actually have a paper that's on the Chuck E. Cheese conspiracies that were going around maybe a year ago, where basically one of them was, oh, Chuck E. Cheese basically reuses pizza. I don't think you're going to find a Wikipedia page on that, nor um, a Google Scholar entry for that, but you may find some sources on sort of the demise of Chuck E. Cheese and that sort of thing as well. So like you got to be a little bit creative here, and this isn't like a slam dunk with in terms of like finding source material either. Okay, so basically what I have here is that you can see I have a date range for it. It's a really wide uh, sort of like net I'm casting on Google to try to get back source material. But now I've got some pretty good things that I can start doing. And like I said, the majority of these are going to be sort of vetted or are going to count as academic sources as well. Okay, so now I'll go to the next slide. Okay, and good. So now you can see, like I basically put the arrow there. If you look at Google Scholar, and I know all the databases have options for this as well at the different schools, but that arrow pointing to the quotation mark is basically going to lead you to the works cited entry for APA, for MLA. So we'll go to that. And there it is. That's an actual screenshot of it. So basically, you can see there MLA, APA, Chicago, Harvard, Vancouver. Never used Vancouver before. Maybe that's a Canadian type of. I should know that. It's probably a Canadian-based citation generator. But basically, MLA is going to be the main one that we use for our classes. I'm pretty familiar with APA. I mean, there's differences to that, but basically, uh, these are going to be sources that you can end up using as well. They're going to be basically citations you can use for your paper. So by clicking on that quotation mark, you are going to be able to um, basically cut and paste that into your works cited page. So part of this lecture is talking about how to do annotation, and what you'll want to do is copy the citation from the Google Scholar page and then put it into your works cited page. And then basically with the annotation, as we discussed in class, you will then answer the questions below the works cited entry. So remember, for MLA, you put it in alphabetical order, and then you put the answers to the questions, which we'll look at in a second, underneath the citation. All right, good. So another thing you could do to sort of be smart about this, because that's the goal here, you can also click on a tab underneath the works cited entry, and you can look at where it's cited in. You can also see related articles. So where it's cited in is going to be other documents that reference the original document, and then related articles are ones that Google through its algorithm, which is pretty interesting algorithm they have there. It's going to make some sort of like references to other articles that you can use as well. So this is another thing you can do to sort of like make your life easier. Because if you think about like how a paper is successful or not successful, it's usually procrastination. Procrastination is usually related to somebody putting something off. Like we've said, you procrastinate. Sometimes I see the best writers procrastinate and be really successful. But where you can sort of spin your wheels late in the game is trying to find sources that marry up to your idea, and they take you a little bit off track. So if you think about it, all the stuff I'm trying to tell you, or all the strategies I'm trying to tell you, strategies I'm trying to tell you, are trying to make this a little bit more contained. Okay, and that's going to be the related article. So that's just a little snapshot from that original one. And you can see there that that also sort of takes down your search results to a little bit more manageable. Okay, and here's where you could start to maybe employ the databases that you have at your different schools, because you may have access to them. All right, good. Now, in my different schools, we have to do annotation. Annotation is going to be something that, there's a little bit of focus on in a research paper type of thing, especially in the second semester. It's a little bit higher level. The goal of annotation is that it basically allows you to summarize your source material. I have an example here in MLA. It basically breaks it down. I'll also put this up on my Canvas for the classes, but APA is very similar. It's the same sort of basic idea, but just different formatting. And annotated bibliography is going to be something that you want to do for X amount of sources depending on the assignment we have for that class. Okay, so basically you copy that citation entry into a document, you put annotated bibliography on there, and you follow the same basic formatting for MLA, just like you would for an essay. And then you basically, underneath the entry, you want to summarize the entry. And it's if you take instructor one, professor two, and there's going to be different sort of ways they go about doing it in terms of annotation, but the main idea is that you summarize and sort of evaluate the source material. So what you'll do is you'll then take the answers to these questions I have in the next one and basically plug the answers only underneath the works cited entry. For MLA, it's alphabetical order, not how it appears in the paper, alphabetical order. And this creates something called the annotated bibliography. Okay. And, if you ever like take a class and you have to print out sources, you would make notes on the sources and highlight words. You'll know that's also sort of part of the annotation. But this is going to show a level of engagement with the source material. There's formatting with MLA that's set up for it, but the basic idea is that you're taking the source material, reading it over, and you are then summarizing it and sort of evaluating it, and you're putting the answers to these questions underneath the entry. Okay, so you would do this for source one, source two, source three, source four, and source five. You basically do this for each one of the entries, and then that would count as the annotated bibliography. Okay, so a lot of my schools, that's an assignment that counts, and then you just want to sort of like keep this pretty pretty tight. And one of the things to also note is you see where it says "In Candy Freak," that's the name of the book by Steve Allman. Candy Freak, they put that in italics because when you do the summary or if you reference the book, you still have to use the MLA rules for italics for a title of something. Okay, and then these are the questions. Okay, so basically you find the source, you go through the process, and then you give an answer to each one of these questions. What is the main or most significant idea of the source? What is the writer trying to do? Who is the intended audience? What part of the subject does the source emphasize or de-emphasize? What assumptions does the writer make about the topic or audience? Is there bias or slant to the source? Are there obvious omissions that seem important to the ideas being discussed? And does the evidence clearly support the writer's main point of view? Okay, so cool. So like you basically write a sentence per, roughly for each one of these questions, and then that's going to be your answers, and then those are going to go into the annotated bibliography underneath the entry, like we got done talking about. Now, you may give two sentences for each one of these, or you may give one, or there may be one that you sort of skip over because you know what, like you're sort of repeating the same idea, like intended audience and what assumption is the writer making about the audience may be sort of the same thing, or you sort of covered that. So I get it. You could sort of like consolidate this a little bit, but you basically want to keep it pretty straightforward with this. You don't put the questions in there, just the answers, and then like look at the rules on the last sheet that sort of talk about the way you tab it over, make sure it fits that, and you should be pretty successful with it. When you do copy that works cited entry into uh, the anti-bibliography page, also just make sure that you double check it on Google Scholar, or even whatever website you're looking at. Just double check the source material to make sure it's done correctly. You can also use EasyBib to sort of double check that as well, even though EasyBib is a little bit clunkier because it's trying to sell you some stuff and it makes it a little bit more difficult to write. If you do use EasyBib, you will see that there is actually a section for annotation right below it, but you can also do this pretty easily in Microsoft Word. Okay, and try to answer these questions the best you can. What's interesting about these questions and answering them, if you're looking at a website that has a bias towards a certain conspiracy theory, or they maybe emphasize or de-emphasize something, this makes this stuff pretty interesting to write about. So I would also think that these questions are a pretty good fit for it. And like I said, you may have a professor you take next semester that does it a little bit differently. Maybe they don't supply you the questions to answer. Maybe they leave it a little bit more up to you. But I think this is a pretty good baseline that I've used for years for annotated bibliography. And then basically you complete it and then submit it on Canvas before the due date, and it's pretty straightforward. And then we'll go through that and make sure there's no errors or anything like that. So hopefully that was a pretty good overview of how to find sources. Wikipedia is a starting point. Wikipedia is a friend of me. Remember, like I said, Wikipedia on Fleek. Maybe that'll be the title of the video. Annotation, it looks at that. It also looks at Google Scholar, some of the pros, some of the cons of that. Definitely also try to use the databases at the different schools. We'll talk about those in the specific classes, but this is a more general overview from a dude that is a professor at different schools, adjunct. I'm pretty familiar with some of the databases at my different schools, but I think this is a pretty good guide to just sort of jumping into a paper in like a sort of like more intro or a little bit higher level writing class, and it will give you your bearings. And for hopefully for a lot of you, like for my 202 classes at Penn State, this is a review, and you're already pretty familiar with that. So it's a little bit more of like a review and sort of just helping you out with that. Okay, that's basically it. So email me, got any questions? Hopefully this was helpful, and I will talk to you very soon.